Now, London Today on News Talk 1290 CJBK, London's premier forum for news, views, and up-to-date information. Here's Andy Oudman.
9 minutes now after 10 o'clock. Let's move on this morning. I want to talk about wind turbines. I want to talk about hydro subsidies. It's one of the hottest issues in this election campaign, the obscene subsidies that we pay to get hydro from these wind turbines, many of which I noticed on the weekend around Park Hill are not hooked up to the grid, but we're paying an enormous amount of money to have them out there. Let's move on to that issue. So, Paul, let me get this straight. You want to, because of the obscene subsidies we're paying for these wind turbines, you want to do what? Tear up the contracts?
Pull the plug, Andy. We've got to pull the plug on these contracts now. It's not good enough. Just, say we're not going to extend the program. We need to pull the plug altogether right now.
And how many lawyers would we need to defend that?
Court of Appeal says none.
The Court of Appeal says none.
That's correct.
It's an absolutely fascinating position, so I want to bring into the discussion Paul McKeever himself, the leader of the Freedom Party of Ontario, the only leader of any party in Ontario who gives us his cell phone number. We can call him anytime. He's pulled over on the side of the 411 ready to chat. Paul, good morning.
Morning, Andy.
Okay, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Can you explain the substance of your press release this morning on the issue of the already existing green energy deals?
Sure thing. So we have three parties right now, the NDP, the Liberals, and the PCs, all saying that they're going to honor all of the existing contracts with these wind and solar providers, and that all they're going to do to address the problem is, well, maybe not extend it any further. That's the case with Mr. Hudak. Well, we're saying that's not good enough. The law has changed in Ontario. In November of 2013, the Court of Appeal, in a decision called Trillium versus Ontario, essentially made a decision that has been interpreted to mean that proponents who choose to participate in discretionary government programs, such as Ontario's renewable energy program, do so primarily at their own risk. Governments can alter the policies that underlie a program and may even alter or cancel such programs in a manner that may fully be lawful and immune, that's immune, Andy, from civil lawsuit, even if individual participants suffer damage from such an alteration or cancellation. So what we're proposing is not necessarily that we go into the contracts and change the price that they negotiated. That's fine. Keep your price. But the real problem here is that under the current policy of the government, the expensive producers get first kick at the can. They get preferred. And the Ontario government says, we'll buy your energy before we buy the less expensive stuff. That's the key policy that we're going to change. In other words, we go by price first. And if they want to voluntarily lower their price, even though they've got a contractual right to charge more, if they wanted to charge less so that they can get some of their electricity sold, then fine, we'll buy it. But if they want to leave their price high, we won't buy it. We'll favor the person or the company that charges market rates.
Paul, what do you do in your normal daytime job?
I'm an employment lawyer, Andy, litigator. I sue employers or I defend employers who are involved in disputes. Because right now we have a lot of people in Ontario who are losing their jobs, most of them to India and China. And why is that? Because a lot of industry, about 300,000 industrial jobs have left the province. And that's because primarily we've allowed the price of electricity to skyrocket.
Okay, I heard one word in that last sentence louder than any other, and that is that you, Paul McKeever, in case somebody's thinking, okay, I just heard some bozo on the radio saying we should tear up these contracts. No, Paul McKeever is a lawyer.
Yes, I'm a contract litigator and have been. This is my 18th year of practice.
So you know a few things about the law, and still you're saying, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, what should we do with the contracts we have, mainly with farmers and others who are producing power from wind turbines and solar panels? What should we do with them to reduce the obscene subsidies we're paying them?
We'll tell them to either charge market rates or they're going to be without a customer.
Wow, you just said it in less than 10 seconds, which I was going to ask you to do. Now, can you move to expound on the legal principle that would allow us to do that without getting into an absolute flurry of very expensive lawsuits?
Sure, and I think we ought to keep in mind that the $1.1 billion that a lot of people will bring up, about the gas plant scandal, we have to remember the Liberals paid that voluntarily. No court was brought into the game. Nobody sued anybody. The Liberals just coughed up, gave it to their buddies, and that was that. Didn't even bother to challenge it. And since that time, the Court of Appeal has made it clear that if the government is facing a question of core policy on social or economic grounds, in other words, if the government has made the mistake or has intentionally put the economic well-being of the province into a noose, then the government is free to loosen the noose, reverse the process, even if some of the people who were taking advantage, who were skinning the public, might end up getting the brunt of it. I mean, let's be honest here. People who said, hey, I'll invest for 80 cents a kilowatt hour, knew that they were going to be skinning the public. And for those people to expect those contracts to be honored when they know that they were dishonest from the get-go, I think is just a flight of fancy.
Wow, to hear that argument from a lawyer is amazing. Let me read, folks, a paragraph from Paul McKeever's press release this morning. Those who entered into too good to be true deals with the Liberal government knew that they were entering into once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to skin the electricity consumer. They will not be surprised that the deals were, in fact, too bad to be honored. They will not be surprised that a freedom government will pull the plug on the corrupt deals they made with the McGuinty-Wynne Liberals. Now, Paul, you issued this statement late last night. What's the early reaction?
The early reaction is I'm having an interview with CTV this afternoon. I'm on the road right now across the province, of course, but I'll be in London within an hour or two. I'll be doing that. I'm doing your show, and I think it's having a lot of resonance. This is exactly the kind of step that the public has been longing for. It shocks me, and frankly, it disgusts me that the PCs, Liberals, and NDP are all on the same wrong side of this fence in honoring these corrupt contracts. It astounds me. They talk a tough game, especially Mr. Hudak, talking a tough game about, wind energy and green, but he's doing nothing about it. And that, to me, is not good enough. The economy is melting down. We need to put the brakes on this and back it up.
Paul, I'm predicting that the next call you get will be from a Mr. Tim Hudak, who will be saying, Paul, I got to ask you, we thought we were being tough by saying no more of these contracts under a Tory government, but are you actually saying, Paul McKeever, being trained in the profession of law, that there might be a way to tear up these contracts the moment we get elected?
I'll not only say that, I'll say that he knows it. And that the reason he isn't proposing to get rid of it is because a lot of those wind and solar panels, wind turbines, are in his ridings where he currently has an MPP. The fact of the matter is Mr. Hudak's trying to suck and blow at the same time. He wants the consumer to believe that he's in favor of lowering prices. He wants the farmers to think that he's got their back.
Okay, Paul, I'm going to ask you, because some people are still just absolutely scratching their heads over there saying, wait a minute, this is a blowhard. Can you take off your hat as a politician for just a moment and just wear the hat as a lawyer, a person trained in the field of law, and make the legal argument why this is not insanity that you're talking, but this is a viable political option?
It's a viable political option because it's the law in Ontario. The Court of Appeal is the highest court in the province, and it has said that there are areas where contracts, agreements, etc., are not cast in stone, where the government must remain free to change its mind, where it's made a mistake and the whole welfare of the province is in peril. There, the courts are not going to allow a farmer to bring a lawsuit and force the public to melt down the economy. It's common sense. So I'm trying to put it in regular English terms, not legalese. The term you'll see used in the court decision is core policy, core social or economic policy. Those are matters which basically are matters in which the government cannot be sued, cannot be held locked in cement shoes to the bottom of the ocean.
You know, Tim Hudak's a pretty gutsy guy. Anybody who stands up during an election campaign when he's more or less tied in the ratings with the premier and could become the next premier if he doesn't step in some doo-doo and announces he's going to kill 100,000 jobs, that's a guy who's got guts. Do you think Tim Hudak has the guts this morning to have a look at this policy from the Freedom Party of Ontario and respond by saying, holy mackerel, this is fascinating. I think we should do this?
Well, let's put it this way. If he does, and I don't think he does, but if he does, because I think he has political interests on the side of the windmills and the solar panels. But if, he surprises us all and says, okay, we're on board, then Freedom MPs will work with PC MPPs to make sure that this happens. Look, Freedom Party is not, I'm not in this to be the premier. I'm in this to make sure that if I am the premier, then great. But if not, we're going to have as many MPPs in there as possible to push through the changes that are necessary. And I think in an environment that we have at present, where everyone's talking about another minority government, the catchword, the watchword should be coalition. If we need to form a coalition, we will. Freedom Party will participate in that coalition to ensure that a majority can be formed and that we can reverse some of these horrible liberal programs that have been forced on our throats over the last 10 years.
Okay, we're going to go right to the phones. Diane, what do you think of what you're hearing from Paul McKeever, leader of the Freedom Party of Ontario?
I'm very, very glad he's bringing it up, but I want to know why. When did he know this?
Okay, go ahead and talk.
Why has he not done anything about it sooner? Why did he wait till right now?
Okay, Diane, go ahead and talk to Paul directly. Go ahead.
Paul, I've been PC all my life, and I was even thinking a little of the Freedom Party, but I again vote PC. But if you do join together, that's wonderful. But you're striking all three other parties, and if you say that Tim Hudak knew this and didn't do anything about it, well, excuse me, how long have you known about this and done absolutely nothing, and now you're bringing it ahead? I'm glad you did. Thank you very much. But your attitude, to me, you've lost a little of my respect.
Am I on there, Andy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Freedom Party has been consistent on this in the election of 2011 and in 2010. In fact, if you look, Google Paul McKeever on my blog, I wrote an entire blog entry explaining what was going to happen if the Green Energy Plan was pursued. And in the election of 2011, we campaigned on completely repealing the Green Energy Act. The decision, of course, that I was talking about only happened months ago in November of 2013. But the position of the party, a Freedom Party, has always been against green energy, repealing the Green Energy Act, contrary to the leader of the PC party, who was asked in 2011 when he was complaining about the Green Energy Act. He was asked point blank on Focus Ontario, well, are you going to repeal it then? His answer was, well, we'll look at it and we'll see what works and what doesn't. I mean, this is not a position that a responsible person takes.
No, I agree with that. But you know what? I'm not, there's dozens and dozens of listeners that don't even have access to a computer. So instead of going on a stupid blog, why don't you please come out and talk about it verbally? Bob Metz is on there all the time. I have never heard him say that, and he is a representative of your party.
Okay, let's clarify a couple of facts. First of all, Diane, I think Paul just made the point that this court decision that he is referring to did not happen until literally just a few months ago, November of 2013. We're now in May of 2014. I guess, Diane, what I would say to Paul is, Paul, we're only less than 3 weeks away from the election. Why have you been holding back on this very explosive policy?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not so much being held back, but being finally given the opportunity to be heard. Freedom Party, as you know, has to claw and scratch to be heard. We're not included in leaders' debates. We're in fact, in many cases, not invited to all candidates' debates. So we do what we can to get our message out. But you'll see no shortage of me on televised shows. We have an archive you can watch online if you'd like.
Okay, let me go back.
I've been talking about this. It's not just a thing I've been doing in recent months.
Okay, let me go back to Diane. Diane, let's go back to you. Let's put aside whether or not Paul should have come out with this earlier. What are you saying about the policy that he is defending this morning, and that is tearing up these contracts? These contracts which force the Ontario taxpayer to pay obscene subsidies to people with wind turbines.
I'm glad he brought it ahead, because doesn't it show the corruption of the Liberal government then? They never, ever in the beginning ever had to pay that money out. If that has not brought anything else out, I hope even the Liberals, who have been so steadfast, they can see they're not part of the solution. They are definitely the problem all the way along.
Before you go, Diane, let me just ask Paul. Paul, what do you think the reaction is going to be today from the three mainstream party leaders, Kathleen, Andrea, and Tim?
Absolute silence. They will hope that it passes over quickly and that nobody makes an issue out of it. none of them wants to take the stand that we just took today.
Do you think any of them will suggest in a very subtle way that you have taken leave of your senses?
Oh, they might suggest like that if they like. If they say that, they're basically saying that the Court of Appeal has taken leave of its senses. I stand on the side of the law, not on the side of, the current election.
Wow, that is very, very interesting.
Andy, can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
The voters have their say. Why can't people get on the phone and call whoever their representative is and ask them? Paul, it's not that I don't believe you, but, come on, let's see what these other people are going to be saying. Now that we know about this, we know the question to ask. Okay,
Paul, what would the question be? If Diane is going to phone her local Tory, since she says she's going to vote Tory, she wants to confirm this with her local Tory candidate, what is the question she should ask?
Will you vote in favor of pulling the plug on the already existing green energy deals with wind and solar providers?
Well, okay, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate from the bottom of my heart you bringing this ahead so that it gives us some other kind of tipping point of who we want to vote for.
Diane, get back to me if you talk to your Tory candidate.
I will. I talked to Jeff Urick the other day. He was down in Toronto, and I know he will, if I call him on this, he will return, and I'll let you know, Andy.
Diane, I'll be waiting for that. Thank you so much. Let's go to Dave and then Ann. Dave, go ahead. What's your reaction to the leader of the Freedom Party's suggestion that we simply pull the plug, tear up the contracts with the farmers who have wind turbines and the folks who have the solar panels?
Well, I think it's absolutely wonderful, and Paul brings up just a couple of amazing points. We see it in the private sector all the time. If companies run into trouble, they may have contracts, but they just may go to their suppliers or anyone else and say, we just can no longer do that, and they restructure. But the government made basically these deals that, again, in the private sector would be considered criminal. When you're paying people 9 times the actual value of a product, that might sound like a Ponzi scheme, and you've certainly seen in legal questions in the United States and Canada, even locally here, if you give a $500 donation and you get a $22,000 tax credit, I think Revenue Canada looks at those people and say, you should know that was something was amiss. People that have got involved in Ponzi schemes that get paid out early, which is the case of the hydro, because we're forced to buy the most expensive hydro first, not competitive at all. They should have known as well. And, of course, at the end of the day, that the Liberal Party has to be held accountable for doing something that was so detrimental and so blatantly detrimental to the health and the welfare of the Ontario economy.
In other words, if it seems too good to be true, Dave.
We hear it all the time. If I buy a car at the side of the road and it's a BMW 2013 and they want $9,000 for it, and then they come back to me and say, well, stolen. I said, no, but I paid for it. You should have known. How come in this particular case, and the government will hide behind its own frailties by just trying to hide behind the law? And this is why I'm excited about Paul's come up. If the Ontario Appeal of the Court says that that's the highest order and that we can do that, absolutely rip these things up. They're ruining everybody's lives. Tell me one person beyond the people that are in this kind of Ponzi scheme who have benefited from higher electricity rates.
Great call, Dave. We do have to take a short break. Vitaly and Ann, you're up next. This is absolutely fascinating. Paul McKeever with the Freedom Party of Ontario saying one of the reasons we're growing broke in Ontario, why we're sliding into Lake Erie, is the obscene subsidies we're paying for all these wind turbines. So let's tear up the contracts, and we have a legal basis on which to do that so we don't get hit with a tsunami of lawsuits. Absolutely fascinating. Back with William, with Ann, with Vitaly, and your call in just a moment, right here on London Today on News Talk 1290 CJBK.
You're listening to London Today with Andy Oudman. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can email londontoday@cjbk.com or call 519-643-1290.
So, Paul, let me get this straight. You want to, because of the obscene subsidies we're paying for these wind turbines, you want to do what? Tear up the contracts?
Pull the plug, Andy. We've got to pull the plug on these contracts now. Not good enough. Just, say we're not going to extend the program. We need to pull the plug altogether right now.
And how many lawyers would we need to defend that?
Court of Appeal says none.
The Court of Appeal says none.
That's correct.
An explosive new suggestion on the campaign trail today. The leader of the Freedom Party of Ontario, Paul McKeever, saying there is a solution to the obscene subsidies that we're paying to farmers to produce power we don't need from wind turbines, and that is tear up the contracts. And we have the absolute legal ground to do that without getting hit with a flurry of lawsuit. Ann, what do you think?
Well, I think that I absolutely trust Paul McKeever. He's a very intelligent man. He's a lawyer. He's an expert with contract law. And I think that we should go ahead and do it. But I do not think the Freedom Party should have a coalition with the PC Party, period. I don't trust Tim Hudak, and I don't trust his party, and I would hope to God that Paul McKeever reconsiders it. I don't think they should go anywhere near the PC Party. I think Paul should get a coalition of citizens in these areas with the Freedom Party on its own to get rid of these contracts, and I don't know if it's possible, but getting in bed with the PCs bothers me, with the greatest respect to Paul McKeever, because one of the things I like about him is he's honest. Don't get into bed with somebody dishonest, Paul.
Paul, your reaction?
Yeah, I hear what she's saying, Ann, and trust me, coalition is not our primary objective here. Our primary objective is, of course, to form the government without doing so. But my concern is I don't want the current minority government situation to continue, whereby, you know, the NDP holds the Liberals hostage and we end up with yet more spending and taxing. If we're faced with that, I would rather have two parties work together as a majority to stop that kind of stuff than allow Ontario to be kept held hostage. But I hear you, and coalition is not my option A. That's a plan B, trust me. Okay,
and on the very issue, the specific issue of proposing that we tear up these contracts, I can hear you applauding.
Well, absolutely, Andy. I want people to know this, and this is no politicians mentioning it in the three parties in particular. The Washington Post did a 6-page article about the Ponzi scheme of the mob who started wind turbines in Italy, and that is what it is. It's a money laundering scheme. This is how it originated. And I've long said we need an RCMP investigation in Ontario, and we need a Charbonnet type of inquiry in Ontario, because it's a little bit too coincidental to me, Andy, that the precise particular family that started this in Italy coincidentally happens to be the same branch of the mafia that RCMP are saying we have a problem with in Ontario now.
And
that's not a coincidence.
And hang on, Paul, your response to that.
Well, I'm not going to claim that everybody who's taken advantage of these contracts is mafia connected, although, you know, it's an interesting question as to who has gotten the contracts. I remember that when the wind contracts were first discussed being issued, the first story I saw was about a Liberal insider, or a former Liberal insider within the McGuinty, I can't remember if it was a cabinet official, was one of the first people who ended up getting a massive wind farm contract from the government. Basically, hey, you want some free money? We'll make sure that you can make this thing happen, even though you're no more moneyed than anyone else on the street. And so, you know, they're literally handing out contracts to politically connected people so that they can make a killing at the public's expense. I think it's wrong. And
we had a great caller. Really appreciate it. We have to move on. We have every line lit up. Vitaly, thanks so much for waiting.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
Good.
First of all, I want to comment that thank goodness that the Freedom Party is not going to win, and that's a great thing. Number two, I would like for the leader of Freedom Party to explain to the Ontarians the subsidies that we pay for nuclear at the $2 a kilowatt, and how he would respond to that.
Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good branch-off point, actually, because in 2018-2020, the six reactors at Pickering are going to be decommissioned. And at that point, there's going to be a need to replace that generation capacity. The current proposal by the PCs is to spend, they're going to be $13 billion per unit. That was the most recent quote. So to replace those 6 units, we're looking at $78 billion of taxpayer money. This is Mr. Hudak's PCs talking, because he's dedicated to nuclear. He says it's going to be $78 billion to replace those 6 units. This is from a man who claims he wants to balance the budget. What that $78 billion is going to be is, as the caller just said, a subsidy that eventually will be tacked on as another debt retirement charge. It's something that Freedom Party is against. We think that the proper way to deal with the demand that's going to result in 2018 is to allow a competitive system. Again, price determines it first, not sticking the taxpayer with a $78 billion nuclear power investment.
Vitaly, let me just ask you to focus specifically on Paul McKeever's suggestion that we tear up the contracts with people who have wind turbines and solar panels.
Well, Well, Andy, this is directly correlated with that because we have been subsidizing nuclear, coal energy for years and years. Nobody's been talking about this. What are we going to tell our children and children's children that we're paying $3 billion annually in healthcare costs as a direct result of a coal generation and subsidizing nuclear energy? So where are we going to find the renewable energy or other energy sources to have the Ontario ever-increasing need for electricity, and how that's going to happen?
Okay, let me bounce that one over, Vitaly. Where, Paul, if we shut down the wind turbines and solar panels, where are we going to get our energy?
Well, what we already have is a good supply of gas that, if you look at the power chart, effectively wind is wagging the dog. So when wind is producing a lot of electricity, they back off on the gas production, gas-powered or gas-sourced electricity production. But when wind isn't available and when the sun's not shining, the gas plants are taking over. So effectively, we already have capacity right now to deal with taking those things. If they were taken offline today, the wind and the solar panels, we would have sufficient capacity to deal with all of our needs. We don't need them right now. They're excess capacity. And the reason we have these gas plants right now is to make up for the shortages because we're so wed to giving wind and solar the first dibs on the
Vitaly, we thank you for your call. We're going to move on to William. William, go ahead.
Thanks, Andy. I think this is a great idea from the Freedom Party. And your first caller, Diane, she asked how come Paul is coming forward with this now. Well, what people have to understand is the Freedom Party has been saying stuff like this for years. I know the decision was just made in 2013 in November, but decisions like this and all this information the Freedom Party has been saying for months and years, and people do not listen. People do not take the time to research like an informed voter should the policies of the Freedom Party, because they would be surprised at just how beneficial the policies of the Freedom Party are. Whenever I hear somebody whine and complain about the current state of government, I just shake my head because they have the opportunity to discover the alternatives out there, and no one ever does. We get the same old stuff time and time again. So I applaud Paul McKeever and the Freedom Party, and if people just took the time to research them instead of waiting for them to come to the public, we would be in a better situation.
William, I appreciate the call. We're going to take a short break. Paul, when we come back, I want to ask you, I have said all along, Ontario is sliding into Lake Erie. We are virtually bankrupt. The debt per person in Ontario 4 times what the residents of California are carrying on their shoulders, and they are the poster child for bad finances when it comes to government. This morning, Christina Blizzard, in her column, said this province, if we elect Kathleen Wynne again, will see a credit downgrade. That is very, very scary. I want to ask you about that when we come back in just a moment. Right here on London Today on News Talk 1290 CJBK.
You're listening to London Today with Andy Oudman. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can email londontoday@cjbk.com or call 519-643-1290.
So, Paul, let me get this straight. You want to, because of the obscene subsidies we're paying for these wind turbines, you want to do what? Tear up the contracts?
Pull the plug, Andy. We've got to pull the plug on these contracts now. It's not good enough. Just, say we're not going to extend the program. We need to pull the plug altogether right now.
And how many lawyers would we need to defend that?
Court of Appeal says none.
The Court of Appeal says none.
That's correct.
It is an explosive new suggestion in the Ontario election campaign. It comes from the Freedom Party, and that is to deal with these, what I'm calling obscene subsidies to farmers with wind turbines to produce power we don't need and which costs us $1 billion a year to sell to our neighbors. We simply tear up the contracts because the contracts, the people who signed them should have known, were too good to be true. And, Paul, if you would kindly explain the legal basis, Paul, on which we would do that, Paul.
Yes. Basically, the Court of Appeal has said that on matters of core policy, the government cannot have its hands tied by a contract the nature that we've got here, because it would amount to saying that individual participants in the program, the farmers and whatnot, could effectively force Ontario to put a noose around its neck and finish the job. which the government's job is to protect the public from that kind of thing. And so it would be totally at odds, basically, with the key role of government.
So the legal principle here would be that the farmers should have known this was too good to be true.
Absolutely. And it is.
And that for the government it was too bad to be true.
Yeah, too bad to be actually supported on an ongoing basis. It looked good on paper for the Liberals who were trying to, say they were going to get rid of coal and bring in clean, green electricity in a time of David Suzuki. But it's proven to be an economic nightmare.
Okay, let's go to the phones again. Alan, your reaction to Paul McKeever's suggestion.
Well, first of all, the guy's talking through his hat or blowing it out somewhere else. You can't renege on a contract like that. I'll tell you, I'm in the solar business, okay, so I'm a little biased here. Now, the wind power I can partly agree with. Nobody likes them anyways. But to say that they're going to tear up the contracts, that's complete nonsense. That's never going to happen. We've already looked into that with the solar industry. And if he shuts it down, there's between 30 to 50,000 jobs that are going to be gone.
Well, Paul McKeever, you'd be able to top Tim Hudak. He's saying I'm going to kill 100,000 jobs. How many jobs do you think, Alan, would go if we shut down solar?
We're not proposing to shut down solar. We're proposing that Alan charge market rates, and the number of employees that he lays off depends on what he's paying them. I mean, if he's paying them too much because he's making too much, he's going to have a deal with his employees. But apart from that, it's in Alan's hands. We're not going to help Alan to maintain his workforce if what's required to do it is to skin the public for him. That's not going to continue.
Alan, let me ask you this. Do you not feel guilty that by accepting the subsidies you are from these solar panels, obscene subsidies in the eyes of many, including myself, obscene subsidies for power paying way over market value, that you're getting rich while Ontario slides into Lake Erie?
No, and I'm not getting rich. Let me tell you something. They started out at 80 cents, and we're talking solar now, okay? I agree that they paid too much. Solar costs more to put into the time, but just the same, 80 cents was nuts. Well, now they took it down. They shut us down for a year while they readjusted the price because they realized they paid too much. I was out of business for a year. It's as if you didn't work for a year. Everybody went broke. I hung on by the skin of my teeth. Okay? Now they've lowered it to 55 cents, and now it's down to 40 cents. Electricity is going to be at 40 cents within 5 or 10 years anyways, so it's no longer obscene. It makes perfect common sense. And what that guy is saying, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Okay. Paul, your response?
Well, I think the public's just heard what they're up against and why they should be voting for Freedom Party. If they think that a person should be sitting there crowing to them about how they are justly charging 40 cents and have every right to do it when you can get it for 4 cents from other sources, I think that's the problem. If you want to know who's supporting the Liberals, the NDP, and the PCs, who are all saying, don't worry, fellas, we'll keep your gig going, that's who it is. And so for the rest of us, the consumers who aren't making 40 cents a kilowatt hour, you've got your choice now made clearly in front of you. It's Freedom Party or 40 cents a kilowatt hour.
Alan, does Paul McKeever's suggestion scare you?
No, not at all, because he's like the NDP. They don't exist in the real world.
Paul?
Well, we'll see what the real world does to Alan.
Okay, thank you. Alan, appreciate the call. Let's go to John and then Adriana. John, go ahead.
Yeah, Andy, just a quick comment. From what I read recently, that one of the biggest factors in the cost of electricity and the trouble that we've gotten into it is the bill that we have to pay for the refurbishment of the nuclear power plants. In the grand scheme of things, the solar, it is visible and irritating to a lot of people, but the nuclear energy, and another point. One of the reasons we've gotten in such a big trouble is that we overestimated the consumption and the need for electricity by almost 40%, like starting 10 or 12 years ago. So we've got the whole province. We sort of got ourselves into a pickle by shooting for the stars sort of thing. And then I guess you're in trouble with an industry like that. I mean, you have to plan ahead. It's not something you can do.
Let me bounce it over to Paul. Paul, you're not suggesting that by doing this, tearing up these contracts, you have totally resolved the financial crisis in Ontario.
There's more than one problem with the financial crisis in Ontario, but this certainly is the one that is most determinative. I mean, if you look at the history of Ontario, we built up an industry primarily because we offered inexpensive electricity. People came here because they could afford to operate their heavy machinery. They could get the smelters going. They could get everything going at a reasonable cost. As soon as we abandoned that understanding, as soon as we said, well, it doesn't matter what the cost of electricity is, it didn't take long for industry to start the exodus, and that was around 2008. The reason we have enough electricity now to go around isn't because we built up additional supply, but because the industry has literally left the province.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Adriana, you'll have to be brief. Go ahead. Hello, Adriana. Go ahead. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Adriana obviously has had to move on. Now, Paul, you've seen the explosive reaction to your suggestion. How is this going to roll out in the media? We're delighted that you broke the news here first on CJBK. You say you have other media interviews lined up. Do you expect this is going to rattle some cages, or will the party leaders quickly pour cold water on your suggestion?
I suspect they will sing in harmony that it can't be done, won't be done, shouldn't be done. And that's precisely why none of them should get your vote.
Wow. Okay, for those who have joined us midstream, we have just a couple of moments left. Can you summarize what it is the Freedom Party is suggesting, this radical suggestion, and why it will fly legally?
Yeah, we're suggesting the radical suggestion that the Court of Appeal decision be honored and that Ontario take responsibility over its economic peril by not honoring these exceptionally high-priced deals with wind and solar producers. They should be required, if they want to sell into the grid, to do the same as other producers, and that is lower their price so that they can be price competitive. If they don't want to lower their price to price competitive levels, they won't have a customer. That simple.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul. Really appreciate it, and we'll see where it goes.
Take care, Andy.
Thank you so much. Paul McKeever spending an hour literally on the side of the 401, taking all these calls. People aghast, in some cases, at his suggestion, trying to wrap their minds around the possibility that we would have legal grounds to stand on if we simply tore up the contracts with these farmers. It's just such a radical suggestion, and yet Paul McKeever, who is a lawyer, is suggesting that from a legal point of view, it will fly. Hard to believe. Arn, your reaction?
I'm not hearing heart in this conversation. There are people who might well be driven into bankruptcy if a blanket, hard-line approach was taken on the subject. I disagree with wind and solar as being too expensive for the province, but I can't see a blanket approach which hurts people.
Okay, I don't think he's saying shut down wind and solar. I think what he's saying is
tear up the contracts, same thing.
Tear up the contracts for those producers, but give them the option to produce power at market value.
I'm not so sure. Like I may be conservative by nature, but I also have a heart to approach things in a reasonable way so that you can deal with people and not have casualties.
Wow. Well, you got to hand it to him. I mean, he's rocking the boat today when it comes to the Ontario election campaign, Arn.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much for your call. All of you who called this hour. Wow. Okay, Nick Paparella from the courthouse.